Hello, hello, and thank you so much for joining us for our LinkedIn Live episode. I am Allison Zmuda, and I am joined by three fabulous educators, as well as Eloise, the coordinator of academic services. Eloise, can you give us a quick snapshot of the school district that you're in, and then go ahead and turn it over to have your teachers introduce themselves?
Absolutely. Thank you, Allison, for having us. I'm Eloise Milligan, coordinator of academic services for the Shaler area school district. We are a suburban school district located right next to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we have about 3,538 students K to 12. We have 4 primary buildings, 1 elementary building, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. And today is our first day with students, our orientation day. So we're a little busy, but we're happy to join you. And I want to introduce to you now my 3 teachers that joined me on our storyboarding journey this summer. Brunell Truby, who is a first grade teacher, Amy Scariot, who is our special ed teacher for the K to 3, and Darla Hursh, who is a first grade teacher at Marzoff Primary. So ladies, if you want to say a little bit about how many years you've been in education, that'd be great.
Okay. Yes, I'm Brunell Truby, and I teach first grade here at Birchfield Primary. I've been an educator. This is my 32nd year of teaching. So it's been a wonderful journey and a wonderful experience.
Amy,
Hi, I'm Amy Scariot. I am a 2nd and 3rd grade learning support teacher at Marzoff, and this is going into my 23rd year in education.
And I'm Darla Hursh. I teach first grade, and I am going into my 20th year.
Nice. So you're the new kid on the block, right? It's amazing to say that, especially if you have 2 decades of experience. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And this conversation actually was started or launched by a common experience that we all engaged in. So in June at the World of Learning, Heidi and I ran a 3-day curriculum storyboard conference. And I think that's where I would be helpful to start. So again, because you've taught for 20 plus years, all 3 of you, the opportunity of designing curriculum is not necessarily a new one. But what was a little bit different this time based on some of the other curriculum projects that you've experienced over the past couple of years?
I'll answer that. I've been on the curriculum writing committees for over 20 years. So I've seen all of the different designs, the forward design, the backward design. And this was different. When we heard about storyboarding, we had actually no idea what that was about. And I think for me and for my colleagues, every time we look at curriculum, you just see a binder with a bunch of standards on it and, different targets and things like that. And it's very dry. It's very bland. And this was completely different. So that's what I took away from it.
This was the first time I was on the curriculum writing committee. So I've never done this before, but it was neat to see how we took a curriculum map and, had hard questions and everything, and then was able to streamline it, which will help me streamline what I'm covering in like resource classes with the students and things. So that was kind of what I took away. It was a nice way to streamline what I can do.
And like Amy said, I had never been involved in a curriculum writing team prior to this year either, but I was very excited to be a part of it, and just knowing how we're going to be able to implement it with the students and how that's so different than any other curriculum writing that we've had before is really exciting.
So I also want to just do a quick shout out to Frances Thompson, who is joining us live. So thank you. Hi, Frances. We also have the joy of it being a real-time live school day. So sometimes you'll hear a quick announcement in the background. So again, these are not like background screens from Zoom. These are actual real-time classrooms. So again, hopefully the noise isn't too disruptive. But when we're starting to lean into the idea of streamlining, I want to talk a little bit more about that, especially Amy, you started to take the lead in thinking about not just streamlining the curriculum, but how that impacted you as a teacher. Let's unpack that for a little bit. How do you streamline when you were starting to think about the design of those 3 days? So what were the kinds of questions or considerations that you were asking yourselves as part of that first streamlining aspect to the storyboards?
I think before we had got there, we also had gone through and really unpacked the standards, and at each grade level, what needed to be mastered, what needed to be introduced. And that helped as well. And you kind of focused on that as a way to what standards do I need to cover here? Yep. Instead of, like Brunella said, curriculum before is a binder full of just standards and really dry, and a lot to look over. And you're like, well, when should I cover this? When should I cover that? This really helped us narrow down, what each grade level needed to teach to mastery and what each grade level needed to maybe just introduce or expose the students to.
It's fascinating too, Amy, as you started to describe that, starting to think about the idea that it's not one unit at a time, but it's much more horizontally aligned and more vertically aligned. So Eloise, I think that you also had sort of a role and a hand in that, of trying to think through how do we start making those choices at a district level to continue to inspire the work that individual curriculum committees are engaged in.
Absolutely. Our process actually started right after COVID. So I think, like most educators, we were so focused on the data and looking to see where our students were having deficits coming out of a pandemic. So to kind of relay that, to kind of like get through that stress, what we chose to do at the district level was really take a hard look at our K-3 ELA curriculum, determine what our foundational skills needed to be, and as Amy referenced, really looking at the standards, unpacking them, and deciding where do we bundle, where can we just where are those true foundations that we need to have at a K-3 level for a student to find success moving forward. Yeah. And we began last school year in the beginning of the year, just going through our standards, working through a basic curriculum revision for our group, identifying our needs. And then I had the opportunity to go see you in person at the PASCD conference. Yeah. And you just brought everything to life, Allison. It was like this epiphany. Oh, if we do a storyboard, it'll bring everything into a space that we can utilize for students, parents, and teachers. And I came back from that session, kind of gave them an overview of what I saw and started moving them in the direction of how to make the curriculum be more horizontal as opposed to following one unit after the next, and then getting us to a point where we could take what we had created during the school year and bring it with us to Altoona to our next session with you.
Nice. So I also want to, again, if Chrissy, if you can go ahead and put up the foundational skills example. I was looking at the grade 3 one earlier this afternoon. And again, this is first grade, which is also a lovely example as well. This is the one that I saw when you started to share this at our last World of Learning meeting conversation. And the playfulness of even just the titling, if folks can just lean in and take a look at that, of starting to begin to say, how do we get kids energized and excited, especially around territory of foundational skills? So again, as you're starting to look at this from a teacher perspective, can you talk a little bit about the process and the some of the highlights and potentially conundrums that you had in terms of drafting this?
Well, I think when we first started, like I said, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. But once, you and Heidi started to explain this and we had a better understanding, we had to really take a hard look at everything that we were teaching, and then pick and choose, and like kind of goes with that streamlining. We had to look and focus on, what were our goals? And I think this provides that clarity of goals instead of just a multitude of standards that sometimes even overlap. So we had to think about our reading and then connect that with our foundational skills and really try and make the goals for the kids fit each unit. And then also connect them so that they can see that it really is kind of a story all the way through the end of the year.
So I remember when I was chatting with you about this last time we had a call, I was so enamored by the titles, and you told me a quick story of how you came up with those titles. Can you replay that conversation for the LinkedIn Live audience?
The titles came from our road trip home from the conference. So I was sitting in the back seat, and Darla was driving, and Amy was sitting in the front, and we were just coming up. We couldn't stop. We were in that mode. And so I had a tablet in the back, and we're looking, okay, unit 1, what could be the title for this? And we had to think of what are we teaching in this unit, and then come up with a cute title. And so these titles did come from the road trip home.
And Allison, they haven't stopped since Altoona back in June. They really have not stopped. This group is tremendous. And I wish I could infuse their power into everyone, because they just have not stopped. They've talked about it continuously. They've trained their colleagues, and we are on a roll. And we can't thank you enough for providing us with that opportunity. But to go back to something Brunella said, and Amy and Darla, you can jump in. I think an area that really came to light for us when we were in Altoona was how much you have to cover in a K-3 ELA curriculum. And how does that look in a storyboard? So it became very clear to us, as Brunella said, we couldn't just have one storyboard. We couldn't have one just for reading. It had to be a reading storyboard, a foundational skills storyboard, and it had to be a writing/grammar storyboard for our students. So we decided K-3, that was an area we were going to focus on, and we were going to create 3 separate boards for parents to view, for students to view, and for teachers to use as a guide.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for clarifying that, Eloise. And one of the reasons why I wanted to lean in and pay attention to grade 1 and grade 3 foundational skills is that potentially that's something that people say, you can do it for reading and writing, but you can't do it for this. So that's why I wanted to dispel that right out of the gate, because the team's done such a beautiful job, because it has an aspect of playfulness and heart and energy. And again, that's really the secret sauce of the design of curriculum storyboards. They're approachable, but they're also actionable. So it's clear not only from a teacher's perspective, but students are also beginning to see, what are you expecting from me? And how can I be part of that journey along the way that continues to grow my foundational skills so that I can continue to become a better reader, writer, and communicator. So I just also want to give a shout out to Josh. So thanks so much for hanging out in the LinkedIn Live. And I know, Pat, from a comment point of view, I know that you're super connected to the idea about storyboarding, but she's also asking the question about, can it be used in middle school and high school levels too? So before I answer that, I'm going to give it to you, Eloise. So
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's my next area of focus, is to move the storyboards up to the 4 to 6, and then eventually 7 and 8 and 9 to 12 for all subjects. So you've really put us on a journey, Allison and Heidi, to make us want to do this with the teachers, seeing how important it is for the students, for the parents, to really personalize learning and create something that's easy for any teacher to pick up and start using as a guide. So we're definitely doing it for our entire K to 12 for all subjects.
Absolutely. And again, Eloise, I mean, the heart of trying to get a couple of pioneers to get this work going from a curriculum community, but you're also starting to think about the notion of proof of concept. So I think that's the other aspect that I'd love for all 4 of you to begin to have a conversation about, on in what ways are you starting to see the impact? To what extent is it energizing you, not just as curriculum writers, but also as teachers and communicators that are sharing this with families and students?
I will say, from my perspective, I was in buildings this morning speaking to teachers as they were having their orientation, and I had so many stop me and just say, this is wonderful. This is something we've been wanting to have. We no longer have to follow the cookbook approach. We can actually jump out of units, and just having that energy from those K to 3 teachers is amazing. And Brunella, Amy, and Darla, if you want to say what your colleagues are sharing with you, that'd be great.
Sure. I know scuttlebutt that I've kind of heard, and even myself feeling that it's energizing to know that we can share it with the kids and that it's going to be easier to share with the parents. It's going to make the parents a little bit more in tune with what's going on, both right now and future down the road during the school year. And I think they're going to have a better understanding about what their kids are learning and how it's going to impact them.
Yeah, with the third grade teachers, what I've heard is they're kind of excited to get to stories they might have never gotten to before in our reading series. You know, because we were able to move things around and kind of maybe get rid of a story that didn't quite fit. And so that ease of moving stories in and out, and then they were able to focus on stories that they have never gotten to before. So they're excited to be able to explore that aspect of it.
I'm excited as well, of course, and my colleague that we will be piloting this year together is really excited. I mean, like I said, I'm like, thank God it's something new and different and something that the students can actually be involved in. Where, you know, I think in the past, traditionally, it was just, you know, your students are in the room and you're covering every topic and you're testing and covering another one and testing, and nothing ever seemed really connected. And like, you know, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this turns into a real story and the kids really are part of it, where I don't think they were a part of it before. They were just participants in like just daily, you know, routine. So I'm real excited to see how this plays out this year.
And so, Brew, I think to touch on something you just said, we really took it back to the basic level, Allison, of you're telling a story. The curriculum is now a story that you're telling to students, you're telling to parents. And what does that story look like from September all the way through to June? And how do we have those midpoints? How do we make this authentic for the learner? How do we touch everybody that's sitting in that classroom? So for us, it was really taking it back to the basics and saying, we're going to tell a story with our curriculum. And as Brunell said, how do you intertwine everything that these kids need to have for speaking, reading, writing, and listening? And they made it happen, and it's beautiful, and we can't wait to pilot these this school year.
So I think it's such an incredibly powerful and energizing way that you've moved through the summer. Again, I think the contagion that, Eloise, you have along with the teachers that are already in play, one of the interesting parts is how do you create that level of energy or excitement with the students? So I know you are launching for your first day of school that's already getting started, but have you started to give a little bit of thought to what are one or two ways of introducing the curriculum story to your students and families? What might be a strategy or two that you're thinking of using?
I defer to my teachers.
Okay. I know for a fact we have a curriculum night planned. I think it's August 31st. So when our parents come in, we will meet with them and we will introduce the storyboard and actually really explain it in pretty much detail to them. And they will be handed a copy at that night. So they will know and see it. And then hopefully, you know, we're going to work together throughout the year with them and you know, get their feedback as well, because I'd like to know what they think. And then I think my question is always, how do we get the little ones to really respond to it as well? So I'm curious to see how that will work, but we are introducing it to the parents next week.
Okay.
The other part of that is we took the storyboard, and one of our other colleagues that is on the team with us took each column, each unit, and turned it into a poster that we can hang in the classroom. So not only will the kids be able to see the whole story, but they'll be able to focus on a bigger picture of the current unit that we're on, so we can refer back to it and discuss it and tweak as needed.
So I know, Eloise, you're asking to get grade 1 reading pulled up, so that's going to happen momentarily. We do have a question as well from Patricia. So can you use storyboarding for a 3-week unit, or is that too small? Does storyboarding work better for a longer period of time? So I think the answer to that, Patricia, is the opportunity to conceive of a curriculum story or narrative, it is helpful for a particular unit, but we find that it to be much more impactful as students are starting to sort of understand how that particular unit in time is directly connected to their broader learning experience. So each unit actually is another stepping stone or building block as part of that storytelling experience. So yes, you can do it one snapshot at a time. And oftentimes, if you're starting to draft a curriculum storyboard, especially as you're doing it as a DIY project, as a school you're starting, you can actually craft that kind of focus of the story, that handful of sentences that continue to clarify the experience as an initial draft. But that's hopefully a good answer to your question. All right, so if we can pull up would you like grade 3 reading or grade 1 reading, Eloise?
We can keep up grade 3 and Amy can walk us through this one, but this will sort of answer Patricia's question also. What we had decided to do was originally when we were teaching these units, we used the ReadyGen series for ELA at K-3, and they have 6 units. So we've always been just like you. We teach unit 1, we teach unit 2, we teach unit 3, and 4. We never get to 5 and 6. So we decided, we have all these awesome stories that are in this series. How do we connect them? And it really took us out of the mindset of being a traditional teacher and saying, I've got to follow these units in order. And it was through your guidance and Heidi's guidance where you said, really look at the stories in all the chapters, figure out how they match the themes that you're teaching, and move them out of those chapters. It doesn't matter how you're teaching that story as long as it matches your themes. So I think to help answer Patricia's question, Amy, when you guys created this board, can you kind of tell us how all these themes connect and how you determined how many weeks you're going to be using for each theme?
Sure. So we based ours off of, 9 weeks. So each 9 weeks is a unit. And what stories would they be using in that 9 weeks? And tried to find a common thread between all of the stories. So that's how we came up with, in unit 1, a lot of the stories were about different areas of the world. So who are you in the world? Where is our place in the world? It was different places. Unit 3, there's some stories about, I think it was an Athabascan story and the year of Miss Agnes. And they all kind of talk about the past. So how does the past influence us today? And then our world is ever changing is unit 4. And they get into some stories about with natural disasters and things like that. So everything kind of tied together and has a common theme for each of the units.
And I want to add from a curriculum perspective, the one thing I really focused on with the group, and these are 3 ladies of a team of 20 that have developed all of these boards for us K-3 and are working through different components of it. The one thing I want to stress is that at the K-3, we sometimes get stuck that we've got to follow a series. These boards and these themes can align to absolutely any story that you would want to teach a student. So as I've said to them, ReadyGen may not be around forever. And when it's not, we can still use those stories because they're very popular stories. They're prevalent throughout the K-3, but we can also find other stories that fit into these themes and connect to a student's life.
One of the other things I'm appreciating about the development of this, Eloise, is the opportunity to start to see this as an integrated conversation as well. So when we're thinking about how is our world ever changing, it's an opportunity to start thinking about this through the lens of science and social studies and stories and demographics and environment. And so I think the opportunity of continuing to spark those conversations and also potentially have them read throughout different subject areas within sort of the housing of Unit 4 is just refreshing. And it's an opportunity where it's one more opportunity to engage in streamlining, right? So instead of having everything be separated, like I only do social studies during these 20 minutes twice a week, it can actually be something that is more natural and integrated and aligned to not just the reading standards, but also social studies standards as well. So
absolutely.
Yep. And I just want to give a shout. I know there are a lot of comments that are happening throughout the LinkedIn Live, but if anyone also wants to pose a question, I can go ahead and share that with the folks that are in the conversation with me. So if that's something that's interesting, go ahead and do that. There is another question that is coming from Benna Kallick. She unfortunately was not able to make this live conversation, but she asked a question as to, from an editorial eye, what are one or two things that you did as you continue to refine the curriculum narrative? So it's one thing to generate lots of ideas. It's another thing to actually have that kind of editorial eye, whether you were thinking about the images, you were thinking about the handful of sentences. Just give us a little window into what that experience was like.
I think for us, it was putting it in a language that our students could understand, and I think our parents could understand. So not using, educational terms that they might not be familiar with. So, and I think that's how we started with, trying to think of what was the focus of the story and how can we explain it in a way that our little kids could understand it in first grade. And then would parents be able to understand it all the way through? So we had to really think about the phrasing, the wording, and make it so that it was, understandable to young children and their parents.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Brunella. We just wanted to make sure everything was kid-friendly and easy to be understood.
And we took a lot of notes. We had little pieces of paper with all of our brainstorming. I mean, our brains, we were just spinning with ideas. So it was trying to take all of those ideas and turn them into kid-friendly language and get them to a storyboard that was going to make sense and be concise at the same time. I know for the first grade reading one, we had started with clip art on the top of the storyboard. But then after attending more sessions, we had decided that it was more beneficial to have real life photographs. So that was something we decided to change, and ultimately we're ecstatic with how it turned out.
Yeah, and we got a comment from Becky saying that using student-friendly language is so important. And I think the opportunity is, especially when you're doing a K-3 set of curriculum documents, we are working to make sure that the language is as not only student-friendly, but simple sentences. Sometimes they can feel a little abrupt, like from an adult perspective, but at the same time, really starting to think about in what ways can we actually engage in these as a read aloud. So for students that are emerging readers, they have an opportunity to not only hear it, but they can actually see how it's coming to life. So I think that's another important piece. As we're starting to lean into the images and iconography, really starting to pay attention as we step back and think about the difference between clip art versus photographs. And again, you just started to share the insight as to what is most compelling. And it may be different depending on grade level or depending on what the curriculum storyboard is about altogether. But any other insights as to the importance of the visual piece, not only in terms of finding the appropriate one, but also the value of it showing up at all on a curriculum storyline?
I would say from my perspective, that visual is the most important piece aside from the titles, because it has to be engaging for the students and it has to be engaging for the parents. So they've spent a lot of time, and they're not going to tell you this, but I don't know how many times we went through some of these images and tried to figure out which one really is going to tell the story, which one really fits with our theme, which one really fits with that unit, and changing them continuously. And we may continue to change them as we get through this year and pilot it. We don't know. So it's a work in progress for us, but those images are what is probably the most paramount thing to draw a student in and want to learn about this class. I mean, if you're teaching a high school English class, and I was a former high school English teacher, how do you make British Lit come alive? You can't just have a picture of Hamlet. You can't have a picture of Shakespeare's head. It's got to be something that really draws the student into wanting to learn about tragedies. And we've got meet and greets going on right now. So you hear a bunch of the kids in the
Sorry
back.
for the noise. They're a little excited.
That's right. It's a level of excitement. So
That's right.
Love that.
That's right.
But if I can, the images on this is our reading storyboard, and we really did look for the right image, because these actually match the stories and their content. Like that first unit, there's children who are playing and connecting at school, and the stories they're reading are a fine school and far from home, kids who are, in a different, place. And it's all about children at school. The Recess Queen. So it was perfect to see these kids playing. And then the next one was connecting to others. Those stories actually show connections that students make. And then connecting to our world, that whole third unit is all about outer space and our planets and the sun and all of that. So the pictures that we found, we got lucky and found, like, I think perfect ones that really depict the texts that the kids will read, and they'll be able to connect to those.
I also want to point out, you can, on the first grade storyboard, you realize that it's 5 units, where our second and third are 4 units each. But we realize that each grade level takes a little bit longer or takes a different approach in the stories. And we just didn't want to leave certain things out.
Yeah.
So that's why there's different units for each grade level.
So Greta's asking a question, is there a template for curriculum storyboards? The short answer is yes. And it's something, if you go ahead and sign up on curriculumstoryboards.com, we're about to launch a series of events, which includes the opportunity to get free access to the curriculum storyboards template. Eloise and her team got access to them because they were a part of a curriculum storyboards design workshop. So the opportunity of continuing to take that template, and again, this was a Google Slides template that Aaron Roberts, our fabulous graphic designer, did for us, so that they could actually start to figure out how to do a DIY model using the template to continue to make it visually pretty. But it also did one more thing of really trying to step back and say, how do we create a succinct explanation for each of the territories or the components? Because one thing that I'm sure you found as you started to generate lots of ideas with lots of Post-it notes, that if you strung all of those Post-it notes together, right, the focus of the story, you started to have a pretty long text that goes way outside of the box. So the opportunity of thinking about what are the handful of learning targets that are top priority for first grade reading. So in the 6 weeks in Unit 1, that's not necessarily the only learning targets, but these are the fundamental learning targets that are the significant area of focus for modeling, coaching, instructing, getting feedback on, and assessing. So Greta, hopefully that answered your question. So the other interesting dynamic is I continue to look at these images and the opportunity to start thinking about not just capturing with the title, but you also started to lean in and talk about that they captured the territory of the focus of the story, including the breadth of reading opportunities that student had as part of that. So I think the other thing that hopefully you can start to see on the slide in front of you, where you see first grade reading, the idea we talked about in the curriculum design workshop, that it has to be vertically connected and horizontally connected. In other words, connected to my school, that visual cue should actually line up with the title, which then lines up with the focus of the story and the learning targets. So I think that's, again, a tribute to your team, that you actually continue to work and hone to create this. So now I'm going to ask one of the thorniest questions for many people that are joining into this conversation. How long did this actually take to draft?
I think the draft itself, we did while we were at your session in Altoona, so that was a 3-day session. So the draft took 2 days.
But many hours. Like, I couldn't turn my mind off at night.
No.
So I actually stayed up and kept working on them even after the session was over. Like, yes, we went out to dinner and did some things, but when I was back in the room, I just couldn't turn my mind off. And so I put hours in the hotel room as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's multiple hours that go into these.
Well, it's a fascinating scenario, Amy, because I've been doing curriculum writing with folks for a couple of decades now. And this is interesting. It's one of the first times where, Amy, what you're saying right now is similar to what other people are saying as we've been prototyping this, that you can't necessarily shut your brain off, that there is something that is so intriguing about the concept. You want to continue to fuss and tinker and play, because it's not just hard, important work, but it actually, there's some kind of immediate output that you can see right from the very beginning.
Right. And I was afraid I'd forget something, so I would get up, jot it down, and, work it out, because I didn't want to forget, because I was on a roll.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Darla, I think we're going to start going for closure. I'd love for you to say, like, in a snapshot as we move, so everyone has their last word, and we'll start with you, Darla. What is the inspiration when you're starting to engage in designing curriculum storyboards? So if you can think back from the very beginning, what's your insight that you have as you're reflecting on your early road up till now?
I think in the beginning, like we had said, I honestly didn't know what I was getting into, but I wanted to come out of the conference with something that we could bring back to the classroom and be proud of. And as we went through it, it became very apparent that this was not only creating light bulb moments for myself, but it could help create those light bulb moments for my kiddos. And being able to share it with them and continue to change things as we go. And I think, like Amy had mentioned also, that it's really hard to take your mind off of it. It's just making changes and whatnot. And it's been a fabulous process that I'm really excited to continue and be a part of.
Fantastic. Amy, we'll turn it over to you.
So I got somehow booted out. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so the question is, as we go for closure, what's one insight that you've picked up along the way as you have been drafting curriculum storyboards for people that are just getting started or looking to see if this is a good fit for them?
It's when I first thought about it and we were at the first session, I felt very overwhelmed. It was a lot of information to take in. But then like I said, once I got started, it's not that hard to do. You just have to really focus on what's best for the kids. What do you really need to focus on? What's the most important standards you want to cover? And what story do you want to tell? What's the most important things for the students? And then go from there.
Awesome. Brunella.
I think we were all hungry for something new. I think we were, just old curriculum styles and methods just weren't cutting it. And I think this is going to offer something new, something exciting. It's a changing world. Students are learning differently. They're coming to with all kinds of different skills and experiences. And I think it's just going to be a much better way to teach them and to have them be more engaged in their learning than just sitting and absorbing information. But I think they're going to be a part of it. So it was overwhelming, but once, and I still think we have so much more to learn, but what we've learned so far, I think is going to be really beneficial to our kids and their parents too.
Fantastic. Well, I want to take a quick pause before we go to Eloise and thank Amy and Darla and Brunella for joining us. I know they have to head off to engage in orientation and make sure that the little kiddos are continuing to start to get to know and understand and love their teacher. So thank you again so much. And Eloise, if you can hold on for a minute so that we can do your last word.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So Eloise, I know that as a district leader, it's so incredibly important that this is nestled into a curriculum story, that you're starting to think about it from a systems point of view. So I think in our last few minutes together, I think one of the things you already started to say, starting with the pandemic, that you had to start really thinking about streamlining when it comes to standards to make sure that you are using your very precious time with students to continue to make sure that you were engaging in the foundational skills. But I think at the same time, you saw something in the curriculum storyboards idea that you got super jazzed about. And so I'd love for you to sort of think about, from a systems leader point of view, what are some of the insights that you got right from the very beginning, but also what you've seen come to pass when you started onboarding teachers with that?
Sure. And I have to give a shout out to my buddy Josh, who's coming from Georgia. So Josh, love you, buddy. Thanks for joining. For us, I will say what happened was we had finished our portrait of a graduate work right as the pandemic was hitting. We knew we had these 6 areas that we wanted students to show that they had success in prior to graduating. And I was already starting curriculum writing for the K-3 level because we were going through changes at the state level. So we had structured literacy that was pushed through and in legislation for the Pennsylvania legislature. And I had to figure out a way in which to incorporate everything that we were doing, looking at data. So for me, it really went back to seeing Heidi first speak. And I believe it was March of 2021 during the pandemic at the PASCD conference. And she kind of wet my whistle because she started talking about storyboarding. And it started resonating with me. Oh, a story, telling a curriculum through the lens of a story for all learners. We've got to bring these kids back to school. We got to get parents back on board with us. So how do we do that? We tell a story with the curriculum. And then it turned into work looking globally. How do you make this work at a middle school level, a high school level, an elementary, and a primary, and make sure that everything's aligned? And it went back for me looking at foundational skills for every subject, again, starting with ELA and really figuring out what are the foundational pieces that you need to have. And I believe Heidi mentioned this in one of her sessions she had during the pandemic. She gave a webinar example where she said, you build the foundation first. You don't start with the roof. You start with the foundation, you put up the walls, you put in the drywall, you decorate it, the roof goes on top, and that's how we should be doing curriculum. And I'm like, absolutely. We always had an idea where we started backwards in our districts. We started at 12th grade, worked our way back. But coming out of a pandemic, you had to shift your focus and start at the foundation. Because if those kids don't have those pieces, it doesn't matter what they're learning beyond first grade, kindergarten, because they don't have a foundation built and the whole house is going to fall down. So that's really where we started. Then it took me to the point where I thought about my own teaching career. And I'll be honest, when I was teaching high school English and social studies to 11th and 12th graders, that would have been back in 2000, 2001. And at that point, you didn't have standardized tests. You didn't really have a curriculum to follow. You taught what you loved. And I think I really was looking for something that would bring teachers back to the love of learning, the love of teaching. Because let's face it, we go into this career not because we want to stand in front of people and teach them. We go because we have a love of learning ourselves, and we want to instill that upon other people. So for me, it really took it back to, I've got to recharge my teachers coming out of pandemic. They were still stressed. How do we help them focus and really get, as you said, jazzed up with their curriculum? So that's how the whole thing started for us. And once we presented storyboards, the ladies themselves were phenomenal in Altoona. As they said, they were doing this nonstop from the car ride home, at night in the hotel room, sitting in the lobby, having breakfast. We just couldn't stop talking about it. So that energy then resonated with their colleagues when they started coming back to school, to our curriculum committee, sharing with them all the exciting things we had done through the storyboard sessions, starting to show them and work on them with us. So our group of 3 became a group of 20. They all started working through everything. And then it got to the point where they wanted to share it with others. So we had them present last Friday to the entire K-3 about storyboardings and letting them know that we are piloting this school year, working out all of our kinks so that we can launch it fully K-3 next school year.
So it's an incredibly powerful narrative that you describe from a systems point of view, and especially sort of connecting it back to the notion of building from the foundation. Oftentimes we focus so much on the end, like 11th, 12th grade, and starting to think about how do we begin to not only grow those foundational skills across literacy and numeracy, as an example, but also how do we inculcate a joy and an energy and a vitality of learning. And again, that's as powerful and contagious with our youngest as we hope it to be with our oldest. As a formal high school teacher myself, sometimes 11th graders and 12th graders need a little bit of the magic of what 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds bring to the table. So I think the interesting dynamic as we continue to think through how can we create curriculum storyboards for not just our youngest learners, but also for our high school learners, where they still have an opportunity to see and visualize what a curriculum storyline could be. So an example in Virginia Beach, I think I shared this with you in Altoona. An example in Virginia Beach, students wanted the curriculum storylines to actually be part of the course of studies so that they could actually take a look at, oh, what's this course about? And I could open up the course to see what's the narrative journey this is actually requiring of me. And so that continues to create, again, that level of energy and excitement. So Eloise, last word. So where are you heading to next when it comes to your continuation with the curriculum storyboards? What's one or two actions that you're potentially going to take from a systems point of view to grow the capacity?
So our next step is to really look at, now that this is resonating through the K-3 level, is to take it to the 4-6 level for our school district, and then 7-8, and then honestly onto the high school level. And I do believe from listening to the sessions, being at the sessions, what I'm thinking from a high school level is really figuring out how, like, as you just said, infusing that joy of the student learner into what they're teaching. Because traditional mindset of a high school teacher is you just teach from the textbook, you teach your curriculum. You really, as you stated, Allison, have to bring it to that joy level for students, for the teacher. And being former high school teachers, I think it's about, again, having the students involved. I know one of the pieces we've talked about for our K-3 students is the teachers aren't really going to get that feedback like you would get from a high school student by the end of the year. Our K-3 kids can't verbally tell you to an extreme level how they appreciated or didn't like the storyboard, but a high school student can definitely do that. So if we start, from my perspective, I want to start working with high school teachers on the biology curriculum and our science curriculum, because that has changed in our state. The standards are now being implemented in 3 years. Really working with that group and figuring out how do you tell this story of science using next generation science standards and our new PA Steel standards? How do you tell that story and get out of the traditional mindset of how you've always taught science, and really focusing on that phenomena based and having those authentic assessments where students are showing the learning that they've had throughout the school year?
Well, we can't wait to hear more about your journey over the next year or so as we continue to support your work. And the one thing I want to show you, I have in my hands, I just got this book. So this is our book that we have been talking about for a couple of months. And again, it just got overnighted to Heidi and myself today. So Eloise, thank you so much. And we'll make sure that you get a complimentary copy, especially because you've been so inspirational to continue to engage in these conversations. So thank you so much. And
I appreciate it, Allison.
Yeah.
Thank you for the journey.
Well, and anybody that actually wants to get a copy of Streamlining the Curriculum, it is an ASCD member book. So if you are an ASCD member, you should be getting a copy for free. So make sure you check your inbox. If you are not an ASCD member, you can go ahead and sign up on curriculumstoryboards.com. We will have a promo code as a thank you to people for signing up. So thank you again so much, and looking forward, Eloise, for a fabulous start of school in Shaler. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And I will say one final word. You just have to dive in. Everybody should do this. Everybody should just dive in and start letting it happen, because it's wonderful. It is absolutely amazing. It's probably the most energizing thing I've done in my past 24 years of education. I'm not lying. That is the truth. This is just amazing.
And by the way, when Eloise started to share some of the examples in our last World of Learning call, I privately DM'd her in the Zoom chat saying, Eloise, your energy is so contagious. I would love to have you come back around with your teachers and do a LinkedIn Live, because she's living that experience. So
Mhm.
hopefully you can see the joy and the happiness doing rigorous curriculum work. Both of them can go hand in hand. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
thank you. Take care.
See ya.